For today's meditation, we are reading from the book of 1 Samuel, chapter 2, verses 1 onwards. And Hannah prayed and said, My heart exults in the Lord. My horn is exalted in the Lord. My mouth derides my enemies because I rejoice in your salvation. There is none holy like the Lord, for there is none beside you. There is no rock like our God. Talk no more so very proudly. Let not arrogance come from your mouth. For the Lord is a God of knowledge, and by him actions are weighed. The Lord kills and brings to life, and he brings down to Sheol and raises up. The Lord makes poor and makes rich. He brings low and he exalts. He raises up the poor from the dust. He lifts the needy from the ash heap, to make them sit with princes and inherit a seat of honor. For the pillars of the earth are the Lord's, and on them he has set the world. He will guard the feet of his faithful ones. When our prayer is answered, obviously we are happy that our heart's request has been granted. In Hannah's song, however, there is far more than personal gratitude and joy. Even after years of barrenness and shaming, the birth of a child to Hannah is not the focus of her praise. She rejoices in three unique facets of God's being. He alone is holy. He alone is, for there is none but him. And he alone is the rock. She triumphs with all her heart in the existence, power, and activity of God, who is gracious and faithful, the one who knows all that is hidden. Now she learned to be unaffected by the scorns and insults of her enemies, because she came to rejoice in the salvation of the Lord. This was a mistake that the Israelites made in the wilderness. Even after repeatedly seeing God's miraculous salvation, they failed to rest in his salvation. In Psalm 78, we read that God was upset with them. From verse 19, they spoke against God, saying, Can God spread a table in the wilderness? He struck the rock so that the water gushed out and streams overflowed. Can he also give bread or provide meat for his people? Therefore, when the Lord heard, he was full of wrath. A fire was kindled against Jacob. His anger arose against Israel, because they did not believe in God and did not trust his saving power. Hannah trusted and rejoiced in the saving power of God. She also understood that God discerns motives and intentions and can turn human hierarchies and circumstances upside down by that same power. Knowing God as he is humbles and steadies the saints. Out of Hannah's suffering and exaltation, she grows in her knowledge of God and therefore praises him for who he is. How often we fail to see the glory of God through answered prayers and life experiences. How often we limit our knowledge of God to the way he resolves our personal and minute difficulties. Hannah learned from her personal experiences to understand the ways of God and his workings, his government, and his eternal readiness to succor and deliver his saints and his people. Hannah's husband Elkanah recognized the validity of a vow to dedicate Samuel lifelong to the Lord. He loved his wife and honored her as co-heir of God's grace. He did not hinder her vow by any improper assertion of his authority as husband and father. He did not lay claim to be the only one who could decide on his son's future. He respected the weight of a vow made in the presence of God, and both together went up to entrust the child to the priest Eli at the temple. Hannah's psalm looks forward to the kingdom years of Israel. In verse 10, she prophesied the coming of the ultimate king, our Lord Jesus. And this is the first mention of God's anointed, Israel's Messiah. Indeed, her son was to anoint the first and the second kings of Israel. Hannah's psalm is an expression of great triumph, joy, and praise as she came to the temple to leave her small son Samuel in the house of God forever. She paid her vows without a second thought. She gave willingly and she gave cheerfully. She thus expressed her faith and gratitude to God who had given her a son. The gift of a son to her was matched by her return of him to the Lord. Samuel would be the Lord's throughout his earthly life. A Nazarite whose hair would never be shorn as a token of his perpetual dedication. This time was a time when Hannah expressed her joy and devotion to God. But it was also a time of separation when she would leave Samuel in Shiloh and return to Ramah. God's faithfulness in the past is an assurance of his faithfulness in the future. And thus she can give the child to God without a pang. Hannah had tasted the goodness of God in the birth of Samuel. She enjoyed him, yet did not idolize him, the firstborn and only child at the time. She was not indifferent to him, for she brought him a handmade coat each year when the family came to the feast. Yet she did not mourn or complain that she had to let him go before she had a fill of him. She was a woman of faith who saw that a place in God's courts was truly worth 1,000 days elsewhere. Her faith was expressed not just in a word or in song, but in decision and act. She trained Samuel in babyhood so that she could leave him in another's care to be brought up as a servant of the Lord. And her faithfulness was rewarded richly as he grew to be established even while very young as a prophet of the Lord. Also later in the narrative, we read that the Lord visited Hannah, and she conceived and bore 3 sons and 2 daughters. Faith is seeing the faithfulness of God and living in daily obedience to him. God honored her faith. The same chapter God said through a man of God to Eli, but now the Lord declares, "Far be it from me, for those who honor me I will honor. For those who despise me shall be lightly esteemed." She had the privilege of raising 5 more children in the ways of the Lord. In Luke 16:10, our Lord said, "One who is faithful in a very little is also faithful in much. And one who is dishonest in a very little is also dishonest in much." Let us train ourselves to see the Lord's work in our personal circumstances. Thus we may learn to understand his ways and trust in him with love and cheerful devotion. God bless.